talking about two sites on the Thames in East Oxford. The main one is Aston's Eyot, which is here. It's 13 acres and owned by Christchurch, who are over here with Christchurch Meadow. We heard a bit about from Katrina yesterday. So this is an island. It's got the Thames here and the Cherwell up here, and it's surrounded by the Lake ditch, which was originally the old course of the Cherwell, until they dug a more straightforward bit. Next door, we have the Kidneys, which is a council-owned nature park, and we are the friends there. And both these were originally flood meadows, providing hay for Oxford's horses, until in the 1920s they became the city's rubbish tip. So for 30 years, they dumped their rubbish there, probably called it land reclamation, and capped it really, really badly with clinker from the gasworks and far too thin a layer of soil. And they found that all uses were impossible because glass kept coming up. So the council took on a lease in the 1970s and had it for 10 years and started, they linked the two sites and started doing lots of good things. But everything came to an abrupt halt when bottle diggers moved in. This was a big thing in the early 80s. Bottle digging clubs came in with bulldozers and dug most of the site down to the subsoil. Excuse me. Everyone was absolutely appalled. It went on for years and no one seemed able to stop it. There were no photos from the time, so badges of the bottle diggers now. This is one of the original sets there, and you can see from the spoil heap here all the bottles that have been chucked out, and that's what people were looking for. So the college and the council fell out totally over this, and what happened was that the college ploughed all the digging flat, hoped, I think, to have their cows on it, but instead of nice grass, what they got was 13 hectares of nettles. But thankfully, the trees and shrubs were left pretty much undamaged. So 25 years went by, and here's Aston's Eyot and the floods of 2007. If you remember, they were quite dramatic. So now it's above the floodplain. There's Christchurch Meadow underwater, Thames running down the middle, and all the other local pastures also underwater. After a nudge from the MP, Christchurch were persuaded that a local wildlife group was just the thing to sort this out. So we were formed in 2010. The very first task we tackled was the Japanese knotweed that had spread over the years to, over half a hectare. It became a focal task because I think it became a symbol of the neglect of those years. And it became a very good thing to sort of bring the community together and take ownership of the project. And it has really thrived ever since. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about is the work of a number of people, local residents, naturalists, ecologists, to try and start a habitat restoration project here, as well as allowing public access. So in brief, here we are beginning to bash down all the knotweed over one winter. We burnt it. The next spring, we cut down all the new growth that happened. For most of it then, at the end of the summer, we let it grow up to full height again and applied one spray of glyphosate, which was, after the year of bashing, surprisingly successful. The next spring, nothing came up. We sowed a meadow mix, and a couple of years later, that's what we see. We did, you won't be surprised to hear, have some arguments about herbicide use, and indeed we don't use it now because, more information has come of why one might not. So one colleague took on a smaller patch of the knotweed and did it entirely by hand, cutting and pulling with some help. And actually, after a few years, both ended up in the same position with it pretty much gone. The odd shoot comes up, but is quite easily just pulled out. It's worth looking at what animals moved in during the unmanaged years because they had an impact on how the habitats developed. The key one was the deer. Muntjac arrived in the late 80s. They're now about 8 to 10 on Aston's 8, and they use the local area as well, but their core area is Aston's 8 where there's cover. Roe deer first appeared on Iffley Meadows in 1999 and number about 5 to 9. So we reckon, taking into account the local areas, that we have a density of about 1 per hectare, and that's very high, whichever way you look at it. It was important that they weren't there originally because that's what let all the woodland and scrub develop. Now, but by 2010, there was no regeneration whatsoever. So anything we plant and anything that's coming up by itself that we want to be able to grow, we have to fence. There's also quite an impact on ground flora, which we'll be coming on to. Control is unrealistic on such a public site. They breed very successfully every year, and the main causes of death are dog attacks and traffic accidents, neither of which are ideal, but that's how we go. And basically what we're having to do is live with them and fence. But on the other hand, we also really like seeing them, and I think it's very good for an urban nature reserve with lots of people visiting to see some large animals. Badgers arrived about 2005. They moved in on the edge of a copse and increased rapidly. We didn't start sort of monitoring it until 2013, and we've had 2 ways of doing that. We do active set entrance counts, including outliers, and we use trail cams. So basically they built up till about 2017. This is the bar chart. Reached a peak and gradually fell back again, which I think to pretty much a steady state. And they've been spreading through the local area. Just a quick diversion on 2021. We do the counts in February, and if you remember this time last year, we were in the middle of an extended lockdown. Loads of people came down to Aston's 8, found it a complete lifesaver to have this big area of wild green space on the doorstep. But the downside, of course, was the extra disturbance. And we had people ploughing through all over the sort of less visited parts. They were lighting bonfires everywhere, including near badger sets. So what happened this year was that the badgers stayed in the core sets, and all their sort of extra outliers got closed off. Once lockdown was over, they were all reopened again. But you know, for the count, they were lower and have come back up this year. We didn't feel that there was an actual reduction of animals. Now, white badgers are a feature in East Oxford. Here's one pictured having peanuts in a local garden because it shows a bit more clearly that these are leucistic rather than true albinos. I'm just going to show you a quick oh no, perhaps I can't do that. Okay, let's just sorry, I should have got this incorporated into the things. Here's a mixed litter with 1 white and 1 normal coloured badger. Mum was normal, and we've seen on the trail cams mating with 2 white ones. So the trail cam data revealed that we have a ratio of about 1 white to 10 normal. And when the Oxford Badger Trust came last year to do the badger vaccinations, they caught 11 animals, 10 normal and 1 white, which confirms that. It's pretty easy to work out how many white ones you've got on site. And then with other trail cam data, you can get a sort of ratio, again, of 1 to 10 and do a bit of multiplying up. So normally we have either 2 or 3 white ones on site, and there are other visitors that are based elsewhere locally. So we think we've got about 20 animals, a bit less at the moment. Here, top left, is a map of where the sets are. where it says 28, that's 28 active entrances on the main original set. There's 2 more left and right, which have, which are separate sets with their own cubs and so forth. And the white ones are just in this middle one, and never seen at the other 2, which suggests to us that they're not much interacting at the set, though we do find them using the same feeding grounds. And then there's a 4th set just on the edge, using the sports ground, which also come in. There are 2 entrances to the site, and that's a very good place to put your trail cams, and you see all the badgers going in and out, plus all the foxes and deers to also forage on the local area, and badgers, of course, love local gardens. On site, the main habitat effect is that they do a heck of a lot of digging. It's not just the burrow digging, it's also digging up all the ground for looking for worms. Okay, so looking at a map of habitats, this is slightly confusing. So the green shaded, if you can see it like that, is woodland. So we've got 3 patches of woodland, wildwood plantation and the orchard. So it's roughly 50% wooded, 50% open, and most of the open originally was all nettle, with scattered scrub like bramble, blackthorn, hawthorn, elder. Really good for breeding birds and all sorts of things. We have restored some grassland now. Back in the 80s, when the council finished, there was some good unimproved grassland down here with lots of birds-foot trefoil, fine grasses. They were finding brown argus, dingy skippers, not getting those anymore. But with the lack of management, that just disappeared, became overtaken by nettles. So we've got a couple of acres, a couple of hectares of grassland restored, marked like this with the green dashes. There are some areas we manage, like the plantation and the grassland, and some areas we just don't, but just monitor, partly because of the area, partly because it seems to be doing quite well on its own. We're also increasingly finding that with such an increased number of people visiting and dogs, that it's good to have some areas where access is definitely discouraged, and those are the bits in red. Okay, how do we do the grassland restoration? We did one project on the kidneys, half of which is a meadow with sort of, classic meadow management, mowed in August, though aftermath grazing is not possible. Top left is how it was. It starts off quite floristic, runs out of steam by early June. It's very dry. So we tried, with the help of the council, having patches where we strip the turf. And we can do that because there was never any bottle digging there. So the layers weren't mixed. So we strip the turf, plant some different species, and end up bottom left with some patches of much more diverse flora that goes on flowering further into the summer. The key thing has really been the introduction of birds-foot trefoil and the knapweeds as far as bees and butterflies go. On Aston's 8, where that approach isn't possible because of the disturbed soil, we used the knotweed patches, we used some of the nettle patches. We used 2 approaches, herbicide originally and seeding, or we just mowed, sometimes with seeding as well, and sometimes without. And in fact, if you keep on it, repeated mowing does get you there, but it's much, much slower. So this is a bit we've done. So you get the original things you planted, and then an awful lot of other things come in, which is great. So, of course, we hit problems. The key one is that with fertile disturbed soil and a huge seed bank of nettles, it's not that easy to stop them returning. We've got a brilliant batch of volunteers. We have wildflower champions who clear bits from nettles. This led to the second discovery that we totally underestimated the impact of the deer on ground flora. For example, there used to be big swathes of sweet violet. Where have they gone? well, here are some under the nettles, let's weed out the nettles to promote them a bit, only to find that they then promptly disappear. So we have started doing some bigger areas of deer exclosures. And the top picture here is one on one of our meadows. Equal numbers of cowslip plants on both sides of the fence. You can see the two posts marking where the fence is. And you can see the rosettes of the plants. But where the deer have access, the minute the flower comes up, it's nibbled off. So there's quite a dramatic difference on the ground between inside and outside. And of course, it's not just the cowslips, you then get the dandelions and all the meadow flowers that are so palatable, like knotweeds and meadow cranesbill. Actually, a huge number of species are quite severely impacted with that high deer density. There are, of course, unpalatable species. I mean, and it tends to be thistles, burdock, teasels, oddly, ox-eye daisy, but really there are not that many of them. Trampling is another issue on path edges and by the riverbanks. And the riverbanks, when we cleared round Loose Drive and Marsh Woundwort, all the remnants of the old flood meadow vegetation, we found that too was got by the deer. So more exclosures is where we're going. But despite all this, our plant recorder has found 335 species of vascular plant. About 30 of them are woody. About 25 of them are ones we've planted in that weren't there at all. But the thing is, there's an awful lot of those are just one or two specimens. They're hanging on, you know, over the edge of the riverbank or something like that. They're just found in very small numbers. Ooh, missed one. There we are. So let's not sort of, nettles have their own value too. There's nothing wrong with having a large nettle patch. We're probably breeding brenested butterflies for the whole of East Oxford, and it is absolutely thick with loads of moths like snouts and mothers of pearl. If you walk in on a warm July evening, there will be clouds of insects coming out. And below, the soil is rich. It's full of earthworms, full of moles and badger feeding, and lots of other invertebrates. And crucially, together with brambles, they do help minimize disturbance to larger animals and birds. Now, the bottom picture shows, you know, the sort of thing you get when you sow with, I mean, we use Emmersgate seeds and the sort of result you get in the immediate aftermath of sowing, or, you know, within a couple of years. It doesn't, of course, stay like that, nor should it. And even in our sort of, in quotes, best bits, the species number grows up year by year and it will vary from year to year about which species are dominant. So that's great. In some areas, it's ended up much rougher. You know, with there you can see teasels, we get hogweed, thistles, particularly welted thistle and creeping thistle for us, burdock, ragwort. But you have to say that looking at this, for invertebrates and bees and moths and butterflies, one begins to think that this rougher meadowland actually has a lot going for it. It's actually pretty rich, and it's clearly very good pollen and nectar sources, and there's loads there. We also find it's worth just disrupting nettle patches with mowing just to promote some of these tougher species. So butterflies and moths, we've got 24 species recorded since 2010. That's casual observations, plus we do a set walk, which we ought to do more often, where we're actually counting each individuals of each species. Brown hairstreak, where eggs are found in the blackthorn clumps. An aim of the habitat restoration that we kind of set ourselves was to bring back the common blue and marbled white and small copper into Aston's 8. They were all found very, very occasionally on the kidneys. Sort of semi-successfully with the marbled white and small common blue in that they're back, but in small numbers still. So we've got a way to go with there. Small copper came back, but the sorrel is there, but it keeps being eaten off. So we've got more to do with that. One or two sightings of brown argos and small heath on the kidneys recently, but I mean, maybe just passing through, maybe we'll get them back. Dingy skipper, surprise, surprise, no sign. We've recorded over 300 species of moths, well, including people with moth trapping since 2000. That's a work in progress. We're still adding species very regularly. Can't help thinking that bringing back the grassland will help the grassland species. And there's a hummingbird hawk moth on the lady's bedstraw. Bees, Ivan Wright kindly did some recording for us. He did both bees and solitary wasps on Aston's 8 in 2011 and 17. Sorry, this is a bit of a squash table. The number of species found went up between the two, and we did think that habitat restoration helped that a little bit. And on the kidneys, looking at bumblebees feeding, there was much more action on the pollinator patches than control patches, though it's harder to say what that's doing for population sizes. So thank you, Ivan. In the woodland, the plantation was put in to stop the bottle digging in 1980, then abandoned for 30 years. So we inherited really thick woodland with no understory. So we've done lots of thinning, leaving the dead wood, planting understory, and deer exclosures for ground flora. And there's still quite a bit more work to do with that, but that seems to be working quite well. One bit of woodland we leave monitored but not managed, and the orchard is interesting because it's self-seeded fruit trees, and really all we've needed to do is remove the overshading large trees. Dead wood and fungi, we've persuaded everyone to stop burning it all, and now we're beginning to build up our fungi variations. And nice to see earth stars, but we haven't had a proper fungus survey, but we do note that there is far more than there was. The Shire Lake ditch, aquatic habitats, is going round. The middle picture shows the sort of thing. It's quite wide, several meters wide, and you can see it's got veteran pollard willows. We inherited it as very overshaded, so we did a lot of trimming back, brought the willows back into their pollinating cycle. But we then discovered that we had 2 surface drainage inlets, and we have constant sewage pollution, and you won't be surprised to hear real difficulty stopping that. But nevertheless, it works well as a backwater, and we get fish fries, sticklebacks, amphibia, dragonflies, and sort of, basic stuff. The one snag we found is as you open it up, you get an awful lot of sedge, and Oxford Conservation volunteers have been great for helping us thin that out. So that's also in progress, but working well. Amphibian and reptiles, it's always been very good for frog and toad breeding. We've got smooth newts in the ditch, great crested newts in Long Meadow, but they're in a temporary pond. They're breeding in a pond that's now dries up too soon. So we're planning a pond project on Aston's 8. And the heron is very busy feeding there and on the fish. And of course, there's grass snakes. There are not as many, we wonder whether as they used to be. Birds, 65 to 75 species seen every year, which is about the same since the 1980s. And in fact, this is a good tetrad generally, 2 kilometres square, for breeding birds. And changes in which species seen are probably more to do with wider trends. So no more flycatchers, but we've got nuthatches moving in and parakeets. Pop-up species like water rail, a marsh tit the other day on the trail cams. We have about 30 titnest boxes. We monitor them when we have somebody licensed to do so. Very high occupancy, and almost all of them get off good broods, about sort of 5.5 young per nest box. For great tits, about 7.5 for blue tits. That's not Whiteham standards, but enough to suggest things are working okay. And all the scrub is excellent for many species breeding. That's a chiff-chaff family there. Whitethroats, there's blackcaps are quite a lot. Birds of prey, sparrowhawks breed every year. That's their chicks on the bottom left picture. They seem to get off 3 every year, and they're probably eating all those tits. We put up other nest boxes, but only the owl likes it. He uses it to roost. Buzzards and kestrels feed in the winter when the nettles are down. And of course, we have red kites. Mammals, 20 species, including 4 species of bat. Otter and mink pass through occasionally. No hedgehogs, and that's probably the badgers, even though the local, they're there in local gardens. So that's a shame. We also have very many fewer rabbits than there used to be. And of course, the diseases are going to be the main problem. But we also wonder whether the rabbits have an impact on that. A couple of people think they've seen passing through water voles, unconfirmed. There used to be pygmy shrews, but we haven't been doing live trapping, so we're not sure whether they're there or not. Anyway, so in conclusion, our feeling is that rarities are not the main feature, in terms of nature recovery and the network of sites that this is part of down the Thames. Rarities aren't the main things, but we do have some. This last autumn, we found an orchard tooththrush, or rather a local fungus enthusiast found it, and that's been confirmed, nationally rare species. And we have others too, but there tend to be pop-ups. The key thing for us, I think, is supporting all those common species that might not stay so, and to make sure that there are plenty of them. So we're thinking that bioabundance is just as important as diversity. And, we have some measures of abundance, the things that we can count. I can't help thinking it'd be very nice to pin down general invertebrate abundance rather than one's memory of what is passing through. Well, sorry, rather than one's memory of the sorts of clouds of insects you get as you walk through vegetation. That's no good for setting baselines for the future. Ash dieback is an awful lot of our trees are ash. That's going to change the landscape considerably, but we have got plans for that. Restructuring woodland and replacing the other species where we can. So otherwise, our main thing is continuing to be a really good place for local population to see, have good contact with nature, but at the same time protect the nature that's there by managing access, and to tackle water pollution and to tackle the effects of the deer. So I think that's it. And if anyone goes there, please do tell us. You'll find our website. Please do tell us what you find, because it's very helpful to actually know. Okay, so I will come out of full sharing.
Thank you, Ruth.
And that's us.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's really, really interesting presentation. It looks a really fascinating site to go and visit and get involved with. So we've got a couple of questions that have come in. You were saying about using the trail cams for the badgers. Have you had any problems with using them in a public area?
We have to be pretty discreet. Wait a minute, let me stop sharing. We have to be pretty careful where we put them. The key thing always seems to be to tell people what you're doing. So, and the great thing about a strong community project is that you have lots of people looking out for trouble. But it does limit where we can put them.
Yeah.
I mean, we had one problem where we were monitoring animals going in and out on the bridges, when we also realized that at night, that's when the drug dealers come, who spotted the camera and weren't pleased.
Thank you. Brian Clues was asking how many people are involved in maintaining the site.
It's like all projects. We've got a pool of about 100 people who are interested. So we get good attendance at our volunteer parties, perhaps 20 at a time. There's a sort of core group of about 10 of us who sort of organise what's going on. So it's one of these things where lots of people are happy to come along when it suits to help. We'd love to have more people who actually organise volunteer sessions. And the council help a bit. They give us a couple of days a year of mowing.
Very good. And Cameron Miller was interested to understand about bees and wasp monitoring, whether that's voluntary or whether there's any funding to hire the surveyors.
Ivan Wright, who did it for us, he's the shot over wildlife person. We paid him a bit to do that. I'm sure you could get funding, but I don't know of anything specifically for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.